Greetings, people of the interwebs, Jake here. So, War of the Rohirrim kind of flopped, and I'm a little surprised. I'm surprised that it flopped. I wasn't, I guess, as surprised, like, had I heard that it maybe underperformed a little bit, because I didn't expect it to, like, blow up the box office or anything like that. Now, granted, so it made about like 4.5 million in its opening weekend on a budget of 30 million. So even though that's a pretty small budget, that's still not great. And I don't know. So I've kind of been thinking of like what might have caused it to underperform so badly, and obviously there's a lot of factors that can go into this. Like maybe they could have done better with the marketing, or I don't know. Maybe there's a lot of factors, but I think the main thing that comes to mind for me is the fact that they decided to make this an anime movie. And even though anime is arguably more popular now than it ever has been, like even more so in the 90s when I was growing up, when that was kind of like peak anime with like Toonami and Adult Swim and stuff like that. And, even now, like, manga sales are outperforming Marvel and DC, the two big, comic book publishers here in the US. But I still think that even though anime is as popular as it is now, it still isn't quite like doesn't have quite the mainstream appeal that, like, maybe, say, other animation studios. Maybe animation studios isn't the best word for it, but I guess animation in general, because obviously, like, Pixar movies and, studios like Illumination and DreamWorks, yeah, their animation films are usually pretty popular, but I still don't know, even had they made this animated, not necessarily anime, I wonder if it maybe would have brought in a few more, like, audience members, or maybe it's just the lack of this particular story, lack of interest in this particular story, which could also be it. But to me, though, that's the first thing that came to mind as to maybe why this movie didn't maybe underperform so poorly, is because it's anime. And even though, like I mentioned in my review, the visuals I thought were gorgeous. I love the style of it. The animation, though, as a whole, was definitely a little choppy, and I kind of just attribute that to the fact that this movie was kind of rushed into production, so I'm sure the animators didn't have the luxury to really spend as much time as they would have liked to make the animation look more fluid, like other anime, or just animation in general. And I think that's kind of a shame, because I think had they really had more time to, like, flesh out the animation and in general, like, the characters, because there really was not much development at all with the characters, which was definitely one of my biggest problems. And I definitely do think that, like, that obviously factors into with, like, reviews. So a lot of audiences they're a lot more picky about what movies they go see, because your average moviegoer probably only sees, like, maybe 4 or 5 movies a year, and maybe even less if they have a family, because then you have more people to going to the movies is not cheap. So you have to be very picky about what you go see, because you want to make sure it will appeal to everybody in your family, and that it's going to be worth going to see. So a lot of times when movies have kind of mixed reviews, people are less inclined to go see those movies, just because, like, okay, well, if it's got mixed reviews, I don't know if it's going to be worth my time to go see. And in particular, like, so for me, my local theater actually wasn't playing War of the Rohirrim, so I had to drive to the next city over, which is, granted, it's only about, like, a 30-minute drive, but even still, if I had a family, I would then have to drive 30 miles down the road and then pay, a lot of money for not only the tickets, but also concessions. So that would be a lot of money to spend on a movie that I may not have even enjoyed. And even though I did enjoy this movie, I definitely would have preferred to have seen it in my local theater, so that way I can just drive, like, 10 minutes across town as opposed to 30 minutes to a completely different city, and pay a lot more for tickets and concessions. So I think that also factored in as well. How much it factored in, who's to say, but I definitely don't think it helped. And even though and I don't know if this underperformance is going to how much this is going to affect like the Hunt for Gollum movie and future Lord of the Rings or Middle Earth set movies going forward with Warner Brothers. I don't know if this is going to make them less likely or less maybe less confident and less likely to make more of them, or make as many of them rather, because they really only have to make one every 10 years to retain the rights. And a part of me is not entirely opposed to that, just so that way I want like every Middle Earth movie to feel like an event, like the Lord of the Rings movies and even the Hobbit movies to a lesser degree. But I still want them to feel like an event. I don't want it to turn into like the Marvel movies where it just became so oversaturated, where it's like 2-3 movies a year, and then I don't know, it kind of took the magic away. So even though I'm personally not opposed to one movie every 10 years, or even 5 years, that'd be fine. And again, I think another thing too I think one thing that this movie suffered from is the fact that it was rushed into production, which is usually never a good sign when a studio is like, hey, we're about to lose the rights, just put it in production. I don't care how good or bad it is, just make it happen. So all things considering, in my opinion, the movie turned out relatively well, seeing as how it was rushed into production. A lot of people disagree. Like, actually, my review, I actually love one of the comments that I got, where someone said, I think you've been blinded by the Rings of Power being the worst evil ever to hit Tolkien, and in that light, this garbage seems like gold. And I don't entirely disagree with that, because, yes, in comparison to Rings of Power being utterly just complete trash, War of the Rohirrim looks like a masterpiece. So you're not entirely wrong there. And just in like the almost week since I saw the movie, my opinions have definitely soured a little bit. Like, I'm still overall positive. But I don't know. Like, the more time that I've had to sit with this movie, I like it a little bit less. And that could still end up being the case. Like, maybe as more time goes, I like it less. But digressing. I don't know. I just think that it is a shame that this movie flopped, though, just because even though it's not the worst movie in the world, I still don't want there to be like that blemish on the Tolkien legacy like Rings of Power has done, in my opinion. Like, that is, to me, that's not even, they do call it like an adaptation, but I wouldn't even call it an adaptation. It's a representation, and a very poor representation, because it's straight up fanfic, and it's not even good fanfic. Whereas War of the Rohirrim, a lot of that was more accurate. I think they did more things right than wrong. But even still, I don't want Warner Brothers to just kind of keep cranking out like content for the sake of content and set in Middle Earth. So that way, one, they can keep retaining the rights, and also because they want to keep this IP relevant. And again, I understand that from a business perspective, because it is a recognizable, popular, beloved IP. Slap Lord of the Rings on anything, it will get butts and seats. Obviously, War of the Rohirrim, not as many as they had hoped. But again, that's I'm sure a lot of factors went into that. But it still makes me wonder how well the Hunt for Gollum movie is going to do, because that's another movie they're essentially making off very little text to go off of. And even with, say, all the returning cast, like Viggo Mortensen, Orlando Bloom, Lee Pace is Thranduil, Andy Serkis is obviously returning. He's also going to direct. And, Ian McKellen, say... So even if, like, a lot of the characters or actors do return, I still don't know, like... I think that will definitely help the movie and, get more people to go see it, but I still don't know how... I don't know. I'm interested to see how well the Hunt for Gollum does, and I think if that kind of underperforms too, then Warner Brothers might kind of put a halt on future Middle Earth movies. But I do think that there is stuff in the lore that you can do good movies on. Again, all assuming that, like, a best case scenario, they get a good creative team, good writers, competent people to do this, unlike Rings of Power, which I'm going to continue harping on that show because it's awful, and the fact that Amazon spent so much money on that show and it just was absolute dog shit. But anyways, tangent aside, if they do get the right people, there is stuff in the appendices that I think could be adapted into good movies. But I think the key, though, is to try to streamline the story as much as possible and not make it feel bloated like the War of the Rohirrim. Whereas there's definitely stuff that they could have cut out of the War of the Rohirrim to make it, again, kind of streamline that story a little bit more, cut the runtime down to, because it was like 2 hour, almost 2.5 hours. It probably easily could have been 2 hours, like that even 2 hours or something along those lines. And I think it still would have worked fine. But I don't know. So I think that's the key too, is making sure that like they don't add any unnecessary stuff for the sake of like either connective tissue or for arbitrary reasons that movies like to add additional stuff that don't really progress the story forward, and it's just kind of there to, I guess, pad the runtime. But what I hope is that going forward, The Hunt for Gollum and any future Middle Earth set movies with Warner Brothers do well financially and are well received, like not only by fans and critics, but also less Tolkien fans. So that way, we can eventually get an adaptation of the Silmarillion, because that to me is the only thing in Tolkien's work that can ever rival the scope and epicness of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Nothing else, like in Tolkien's work, like in the appendices, will ever come close to that level, ever. And I think that was one of the pitfalls, and I think I mentioned this too in my review of The Hobbit, or the War of the Rohirrim, that the Hobbit movies, I think, suffered from that, where they tried to kind of make it a lot more epic than what it needed to be. And so that's another thing that I think could be a pitfall for The Hunt for Gollum or any of future movies, is trying to... Again, I'm all for connecting them, because obviously they take place in the same universe, but I don't want them to try to like make something like The Hunt for Gollum be a much bigger movie than what it needs to be. Like, that movie, I think, could easily be 80, maybe $100 million budget, because you're not really going to have like any epic battles or anything like that. It's mostly just going to be, as long as they're sticking to the text, it's just Aragorn, primarily Aragorn hunting for Gollum, Gandalf as well, and then you can have like other supporting characters, like again, bring in Orlando Bloom as Legolas, Lee Pace as Thranduil, or any other character, actors you wanted to bring back. Like, if you did want to bring back Cate Blanchett as Galadriel, sure, that would fit, that would make sense. But I don't want them to, again, just tell like a neat, tight story. Don't overbloat it with anything. Like, don't do it for the sake of like add more cameos just for the sake of like adding them. Like, only add these actors and these characters if they make sense for this movie. But all that to say, I hope that these movies do well, so that way, again, we can, maybe the Warner Brothers can talk with the Tolkien estate and they can finally sign over the rights to the Silmarillion. And then, assuming that, again, best case scenario, we fans get what we've always loved, and we get a faithful adaptation to the Silmarillion. And I will say that even though the War of the Rohirrim didn't do well financially, I do like the idea of Warner Brothers using animation, whether it be the anime style or just animation in general, as another avenue for telling some of these stories. Especially some of the more smaller stories from the appendices, or, again, if we do get an adaptation of the Silmarillion, some of these stories I think could work well as, miniseries, or, standalone movies. Some could be trilogies, whatever they wanted to do. There's a lot of options there. Whether I honestly don't foresee that happening anytime soon. This is just me, wishful thinking on my part, and also very, very foolishly optimistic and wishful thinking that we do not only get an adaptation of the Silmarillion, but we get the right team involved who will pay, the right respects and, do a faithful adaptation of something that would be so hard to adapt. So I guess all that to say is, even though the War of the Rohirrim flopped, I don't think, I don't know, I still don't want Warner Brothers to give up on maybe, like, trying new things with, like, story set in Middle-earth. Because, hey, maybe trying something new, they might succeed. Whether it be a new, another anime attempt at, like, a story 5 years from now, or, I don't know. So, hats off to Warner Brothers, though, for trying something new with an anime movie. It didn't work, unfortunately. But here's hoping that going forward, The Hunt for Gollum and then whatever else they got cooking in the kitchen of Warner Brothers for Middle-earth tales are more successful and more well-received. That kind of wraps up this rambly video, just kind of me talking about my thoughts on why War of the Rohirrim underperformed and possibly how it could impact future Middle-earth movies, and also my, again, very foolishly optimistic hopes for not only future Middle-earth set movies, but on the very, very slim, very almost divine miracle chance we get an adaptation of the Silmarillion and, a good, faithful adaptation. But that wraps up this video. Hopefully you enjoyed. Leave comments below on your thoughts on why it underperformed, or, usual YouTubey stuff, like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. And until next time, everyone, cheers.